Does your mind still have a roost on which to rest? Does your mind still have a place that it comes back to after it's been out wandering and trying to work out things or make stories out of what it is that's happening? I want to remind you of one of my very favorite stories. That's that story about Ram Dass. He was that very great Pandit, Hindu, in the line of Shankara. Shankara was known to be one of the greatest of debaters. His mind was so sharp and so knowledgeable on all matters. He was unbeatable in any form of argument or discussion. And Ram Dass was in this lineage. He knew all of the sciences of the day, astronomy and astrology and mathematics, and all of those things. And he had a group of followers. And he used to tell his followers that they were all atoms, dancing atoms in the body of Vishnu. But then one day, something happened to Ram Dass. He felt himself slipping. And he slipped right out of the mouth of Vishnu, out of the mouth of existence. There was a void, vast, endless. He flailed around desperately, his mind grasping all the knowledge that he'd accumulated, trying to find something for it to get a grip on so that he could have a reality back again. And with a supreme effort of his amazing mind, he managed at last to have the hand of Vishnu reach out, take him and pop him back into the mouth of existence once again. But nothing was ever the same again, because he could no longer say with validity that everything occurred within the body of Vishnu, that everything was an atom dancing within existence. So he was confused. And perhaps that's when the great tension began in his life. Because we all have that. On the human level, the need to keep our household together, to take care of our family, to take care of affairs. And sometimes it becomes so difficult, so confused, so adored, nothing seeming to go right for us. And then, for him, on that arcane level, that level of spirit, for him, the students who long to take from him, seeking knowledge from him, coming asking questions for which he could now not give a valid answer. And then on that sublime level, that feeling that we all have of compassion for life, longing, wishing that we could have a purpose, that we could find out what it was we were supposed to do. This extraordinary longing. And maybe those three things in his life became so intense that that's when it happened again. But this time, there was no warning. He just straight out, there he was, outside of existence again, in this void, in this darkness, in this emptiness. This this time there was nowhere, nothing that his mind could hold on to get a grip of, take hold of, that allowed him to even bring back a trace, a vestige of an outline of Vishnu existence. And he flailed until exhaustion took over. Nowhere for his mind to rest. But then he found himself back in existence once again. But nothing was ever the same. This is why this question is asked of you. Where does your mind come to rest? Or is it now like Ram Dass, in this vastness, that emptiness, that void? With no place to go, except life goes on. Life is still present. Existence is still here. What happens for us? Continuing with the new link in our chain, there's a story of a great sultan again, and he was quite an enlightened being, and it was his custom to go in disguise each evening out into the city where all of his people lived, the artisans, the workers, the masons. One day, out wearing the garb of a merchant, in the company of his Grand Vizier, he was sitting at a tea shop in the company of a group of travelling merchants. And then one of the merchants spoke, and he said, "Blessings upon our great Sultan, but I must say that his life must be very, very elevated and totally uninteresting." And the Sultan in disguise perked up and asked and said, "Why do you say that?" And the merchant said, "Well, all he has to do is sit and hold court every day and entertain visiting ambassadors and people from other places. He lives in such an elevated world, protected from the masses, protected from life, just dispensing advice and giving alms and listening to visiting pundits." And so the Grand Vizier, who was sitting there with his blood boiling, said to the merchant, "Well, what would you do about it?" And the merchant said, "Well, he should have a trade." Well, this really perked the interest of the Sultan. And after the conversations were finished, and the Sultan and his Grand Vizier returned to the palace, Grand Vizier was still angry, and he said to the Sultan, tell me what to do about these people. I can arrest that merchant and his friends and punish them. No, said the Sultan. He's quite right. He's given me a thought. Tomorrow you bring to my court all the artisans of the city of all kinds. And so the next day, along to the palace were brought all the great artisans of that great city of Khorasan. The silversmiths, the weavers, and so forth. And from amongst them, the Sultan chose the art of weaving to be his endeavor. And so the greatest weaver in the land was brought to the palace to teach the Sultan the art of weaving. And with great diligence, the Sultan practiced on his loom until he had mastered the art of the warp and the weft, the weaving. And he found that he could go to his loom after a day when he'd had those visitors, he was entertaining guests or listening to the problems of the people. And he could be absorbed in the weaving of a handkerchief and so forth. And he had a favorite piece. He had a piece where it was decorated on the outside with delicate flowers of a special kind. And he made squares, which he gave to his queen. But then he continued with his nightly visits to the town and city in disguise. One night, when he was out with his Grand Vizier, in the middle of the night, in the dark of an alley, they were accosted by bandits and dragged into an unused house, sinister. The thieves were delighted to find the little bags of gold that were in the robes of the Sultan and his Grand Vizier. But then they had to decide amongst them what they were going to do with these two men. But the Grand Vizier was a very astute man, and he spoke up. He said, "Don't kill us. You have great wealth here. We are weavers from a far distant city, and we came to weave cloth for the queen of the realm. If you will allow us, we can make that which can be sold for 1,000 pieces of gold." Of course, the robbers' eyes lit up. They immediately gave back to the Sultan the little loom that he had carried with him continuously since learning the art of weaving. And he immediately began to create a kerchief. It took him 3 days. And when the kerchief was completed, he said to the robbers, "This piece is worthy of the queen herself. Take it to the palace and offer it for 1,000 gold pieces." Now, of course, The robbers were elated, because with the gold they'd stolen from the Sultan and the Vizier, they were able to buy for themselves fancy clothing. So one of the robbers dressed himself in his new garments and went off to the palace and was admitted to the very door of the harem where the queen dwelt. He offered a kerchief, and without question, 1,000 gold pieces was paid to him. But the queen asked, "Who bought this kerchief?" and was told the lie that the bandit had told, that he was a visiting merchant from far off. Only the queen knew that the Sultan and the Vizier had been missing, because there was not wanted to be unrest in the realm if it was known that the Sultan had disappeared. But as soon as the bandit was sent away with 1,000 pieces of gold and hurried back to their lair, the queen called the captain of the guard and told him to follow where the bandit had gone. When they did, of course, it was known that this was where the Sultan was kept. The place was raided. The Sultan was saved, even with their fancy clothing. The bandits still lost their heads. What does this story mean for us in the context of where it is we find ourselves when our mind no longer has any place to rest, not in the nitty-gritty, the worries, the cares, the concerns, the strivings of day-to-day life, nor with any place that it can find that has validity in the world of spirit. And in that realm of compassion, bliss, empathy, relatedness, no thing that can be made separate, so that there can be a trace, a vestige of that we call compassion. It only comes from something separate from ourselves. Where does your mind rest? Does it still have a roost? And what does this story mean for us? What does it mean to have a trade? To carry with us, illume at all times. To be a weaver.